Okay, thank you everybody for joining us, despite the weather. Much different in Guatemala, of course. So we're here to just kind of give you an update on our trip to Guatemala from October 5th through the 12th of this year. So each of us will be coming up and kind of sharing information about one or two of the particular days that we were down there, and I'm going to be filling in for Brooke Rollins because she had to travel back to Milwaukee yesterday. So I'll be reading her part too. So on the day that we left, on Saturday, we left church, I think it was like 5 o'clock in the morning. Perfect weather for travel, and despite a delay down in Milwaukee Airport, we did arrive in Guatemala safe and sound, and we're able to have a full night's sleep and settle into our rooms and stuff. And then on Sunday morning, we had a unique experience when we were in Guatemala this time, because Ginny Holmes, who is one of the American Guatemalan missionaries that actually lives down in Guatemala, broke her arm, and so she actually happened to be in Arizona, and that gave all of us the opportunity to cook for ourselves. So usually we don't do anything in the kitchen because there's a lot of other like sanitary things that you have to be careful of, because we can't use the water to like wash the dishes. We have to actually sanitize them after we wash the dishes. And so we don't usually have that opportunity. And so that was kind of a fun new experience for us while we were there. So after we made breakfast, we had a little bit of rest time. So we went up on the roof of the mission house, and we were able to kind of see the skyline all around us. And there's actually a Catholic church right across the street from the mission house, and they were having some sort of festival there when we were there. And so we were able to kind of witness some of that from the rooftop. And then one of the volcanoes here, you can kind of see a plume of smoke coming up, so we were able to see that too. It is the rainy season though in Guatemala when we were down there, so it rained every day. And when it rains really hard. So that was an interesting experience too. We went to church at 10:30 in the morning, which is a traditional Guatemalan church. And unlike our church that we start and end on time, on a specific time frame, it's not like that in Guatemala. So we start when they're ready to start, and we end when they're ready to end. So the church starts around 10:30, and then we walk there and walk back to the mission house. And I think we got back to the mission house like around 12:30. And so then it was time to make lunch. And then after we made lunch, then we unpacked all of the in-kind donations that all of you donated to the mission. So that's a lot of fun. We sort everything out, and you can see Pastor Darren and Shelby are putting the expiration dates on all of the vitamins, so they write it in markers so that it's really easy to see. And we just kind of organize everything so that they're able to access it easily when it's time to get to it. Let's see. The other thing that we did that day was we had to put together all of our signs for our puppet skit that we were going to do for our lesson. And that involved duct taping handles on like 50 signs. So that took us a while. And then we had a chance to practice that just as our small group too in the evening. Let's see. Then on Monday, we were able to go to see Only a Child, which is a mission in Guatemala City. And I actually brought one of the write-ups from George Ledger, who actually heads up that mission, and kind of explaining what it's about. So I'm going to read this, and he's got a very unique writing style, which I love. So at the time of the Only a Child inception in 1994, their mission was to tend to homeless children and youth. Our initial years were spent exclusively working at outreach, sharing the world they occupied. It was at their urging that we expanded our reach and opened a shelter in February of 2000. Before long, we launched an in-house carpentry shop and formed a back-to-school educational program to encourage our home's residents in their desire to leave the streets once and for all. By 2015, however, it had become increasingly difficult to find candidates to populate our program and keep it not merely functional, but also vital. The causes were many, and the reasons behind them beyond our capacity to effectively respond. Facing uncertainty, I turned my thoughts to the future, ours to be specific, but also in a more general sense, to our homelands as well. Not long after, global immigration captured headlines and the collective consciousness of nations around the world, making it arguably the issue of the day. The United States and Guatemala played a significant role in the ensuing struggle and conflicting perspectives, which emerged in response to a crisis that was new to the world, at least in terms of the scale of the problem. It seems that at that moment in time, only a child's immediate destiny intertwined with that of Guatemala's. Pulling back from the street, we began to recruit youths from rural areas saturated by a level of poverty which reduced one's ambitions to the rudimentary challenges of warding off hunger and providing shelter for oneself and one's family. Makeshift as it might be, as God or fate had it, the youth we had begun to serve came from the kinds of communities feeding the surge of integration gripping North Central America. We fortuitously found ourselves responding to a largely unforeseen global crisis, or at least the Guatemalan strain of it. So as you remember, there was a lot of people leaving Guatemala and traveling up through Central America to find freedom in the United States. And so now a lot of the mission and the boys that they're serving as part of this, this mission now is to give them skills beyond what they would get in their very rural communities where they come from. So we had an opportunity to visit with each of the boys and then see the crafts and actually see them in action. So that was pretty cool.
Sherry, I'm going to say this.
Of course.
George, who's the head of this, was actually a chef in Cape Cod area. Mm-hmm. And he visited Guatemala and fell in love with the country and decided to go back. So it's really a very heartwarming story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he tells it like in a very passionate way. So it's really cool to see. So then after we left the Only a Child mission, then we traveled over to the Guatemala City dump just so that we could see the way that a number of the impoverished families try to survive in that country and in that city, in taking what they can out of the dump and then reselling it. And sometimes it's like dismantling mattresses so that they can sell the springs from the mattresses to make money so that they can help their families survive. So it is a sight to see for sure. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
We had a minibus from the mission, and I was on the right-hand side. And so on my side of the bus, laying in the garbage, was a lady about to give birth to a baby.
Pastor Darren has his, this is one of the actual boxes that the boys at the Only a Child mission makes. And this is Luther's rose box. So I'll set that on the table too so you guys can check it out. And the boys, actually, they're so skilled, they design these boxes all themselves because they don't have any, they create their own templates, and every box has its unique qualities. Then, after that, we went back to the mission house, made lunch, and then we went out to our very first home visit in Guatemala City, which, again, for Alyssa and I, who had been there, and Brooke in the past, we got to see a different part of Guatemala City than we had been to in the past. So we went to a area of the city that is on the side of a hill, and so it was pouring down rain when we got there, and we walked, as you can see, with all of our rain gear, down a very steep concrete road to get to the house. And so because it's rainy season, it's like very, very wet everywhere. But it was a neat experience personally, just because we got to see a different part of the city, and also, just seeing how a different area lives within the city of Guatemala City. So we got to visit with Marta and Miriam, and Marta asked us to pray for her sons to get jobs. They were having some difficulty with keeping gainful employment, and so she asked for us to pray for them. And then Miriam is actually learning to speak English, and wants to get a job after she graduates to have a bilingual type career. So we helped her, or tried to help her too, with her English as well. So, and it's really cool because we get to spend so much time with them, and learn more about them and their families, and really get to see and experience, where all of the in-kind donations that come from the United States are going, as well as, just having that connection with the people in Guatemala City.
And they came to the mission to see us on Friday afternoon, her mother and Miriam and Martha, and it was a long, they had transferred many buses to get to see us, and so it was a joy to see them at the mission house on Friday.
Yeah. And then one of the sad things about their house is, because they're on the side of a hill, it's rainy season, the side of their house is actually giving way to the mountain. And I don't think we have a picture on here of what that looked like, but I know it's on the Facebook page. So, but again, that wasn't like their primary thing that they were asking us to pray for them for. It was, for their family members, and, so very different than how we live here in the United States. And then the last thing that we did on Monday when we got back to the mission house is Oscar, who leads the children's lessons as part of the faith lessons that we do. We had the time to practice through our whole faith lesson with him and get feedback from him on how we can make it better and manage through the many, many children that we would be working with for the rest of the week. So now I am Brooke Rollins, playing the part of Brooke Rollins. Brooke was going to talk about our third day in Guatemala when we went to El Rincon and Amatitlan. So I'm going to try not to read her notes exactly like how she's written them, but I'll do my best. So we obviously began our day with our breakfast and devotion. Breakfast the way we made it, so just the way we like it, as Kevin would say. We had to clean the house because it was on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays is garbage day in Guatemala. And so part of that, and because we're all living there, we are all responsible for cleaning up the bedrooms we sleep in, as well as all of the common areas. So it helps, obviously, to keep the whole house clean for all of the weeks that people are there. We had devotions that are led each day of the week by one of the Guatemalan missionaries, and that day it happened to be Manuel, and you'll see a picture of him later on in the slides. My favorite picture of Manuel ever. He's got a big sombrero on when he's cleaning out the van. Manuel and his family also live in the house that we stay in Guatemala City. And Manuel's devotion was centered on how, about putting our eyes on Jesus Christ. And once the devotion was finished, we gathered our items for the day and got loaded into the van to go to El Rincon. And once we're all ready to go, we headed out. And then when we arrived in Amatitlan, we first went about our house visits. So we split into two groups then. Shelby and Alyssa went together to see Shelby's sponsored child, and actually her family, right? went with the Guatemalan missionaries to see Clelia, and Clelia was very excited, I guess, to see you guys. And then Shelby also got to meet her sponsor child for the first time, Catherine, who was one of Clelia's children. And for those of you that were here 2 years ago, when we went on our first mission trip to Guatemala, Clelia is actually the lady that was almost dying. She was very near death. And we had gone to visit her, and they actually took her to the hospital, and she stayed in the hospital for 3 days. So it was because we went to go visit her that day that we found her in this condition, and that if we hadn't come, she may not be here today. So it's very exciting now to see her thriving and doing so well. I think that's probably the next picture. Yeah, this is her right here. Shelby?
And that's my sponsor child over there, and I really love her very
Catherine.
much. She has a brother, his name is Henry, Henri, and he just recently, I believe he's the one in the black shirt.
Yep, that's him.
Yeah. He just recently did some computer work for a computer company, and hopefully will maybe get the job. And the mother, like she said, is doing much better, but they were overwhelmed to see us.
And it's cool though too, because you get to actually go to their house, meet the family, see how they live, and get to know them.
Amongst the chickens and rabbits that are around.
Yep. Okay, and then the other group, which was Pastor Darren, myself, and Brooke, we went to meet a new family that we'd never met before. We got the chance to meet Irma, Tomas, and their family. Irma and her daughter Isabel have diabetes, and the father Thomas works in a corn bean field to supply and support the family. And so we got to learn about a new way of agriculture in Guatemala, in that they plant the corn, and then they plant beans around the corn stalks, and then the beans climb up the corn stalks. And so when it's harvest time, they can collect all of those things. Brooke says one interesting thing that stuck out to her was seeing the father, Thomas, in the house. Usually when we do house visits, the men are not home because they're out working. But the children went to get Thomas to bring him to the house to meet us. So Thomas was actually out in the field when we had arrived at the house, and so the children went to go find him and bring him back so that he could meet us and talk with us, which was really cool. And then after our visits, we went to El Rincon. There we go. This is near where we do the faith lesson. And had lunch before the faith lessons. We had a wonderful lunch of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, just the way we like them because we made them, with Guatemalan chips and cookies, which is also a fun little experience because you can't buy those things here. Let's see. Now we have children. Once the children arrive, Oscar, who's in charge of the faith lesson every week, took their attendance. So that's Oscar right there. And then we began our first faith lesson of the week. We sang songs with the children, prayed, and then did our puppet skit. So we have international traveling puppets from Christ Lutheran Church now, because we had 2 puppets. Yes, that joined us on our trip.
Did they have to have passports too?
Yeah. They had their very own duffel bag that they got to travel in. So there we are doing our puppet skit. And then we had a couple of the older Guatemalans help us with some of the props also. So that was nice. After the puppet skit, the children all did the craft. And the craft that we had for the children was an owl. And they colored it in, and there was their memory verse on the owl. We actually got to do that same craft with the children in Sunday school a couple weeks, or the week before we left, something like that, here at church. So everyone here got to experience that too. Let's see.
Well, sure, Ann, can I just say something?
Yeah.
Anyway, I sat out in the audience because I wasn't, they were just really treating me like a queen.
You wanted to be with the kids.
Was sitting next to me, and they kept getting closer and closer to me, and we were sitting on little plastic stools about this high. And finally with the children. And Sherry Ann and Pastor Darren and Alyssa, they had fun jumping rope. The kids thought that was really, really fun. The pastor would hold up the kids and jump at the same time. They really loved it. And they liked to rub his head.
Yep, that is true.
I just shaved this morning. If any of you-
Well, and it's a big deal for those kids to see a man in a role like this, because it's not something that they normally see. And so having Pastor Darren with us was really awesome for that fact.
They really loved playing, and El Rincon, I think it was, they really loved playing especially,
Right.
and the boys had their own game that they made up, where at first I was like kind of sitting down, and he kept trying to jump on me. As soon as I would stand up, he like got afraid that he was getting up too high, so he jumped down. So that kept happening. I'd squat down, he'd jump on top of me, and I'd stand up and he'd be like, ah! And then we kind of morphed that to like, I had him giving me a high five, jumping and hitting my hand. Then when all the other boys saw that, they had to do that too. So that was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was very enjoyable watching you with the kids, for sure. And then, this is later on in the evening. So after we cleaned up, then we packed up and got back, and I can't remember, it was pouring down rain like right before we did our puppet lesson, and then a little bit at the start, but then finally it cleared off, and we didn't have to walk back to the van or anything with all of our stuff in the pouring rain, thank God. So back at the house, we prepared and had dinner. We went over to our schedule for the next day, and then during dinner, George had brought 3 of the young men from Only a Child over who weren't there when we had gone the day before. So they were in school, and so they weren't able to meet with us. And so he actually brought them over to the house with them. And these 3 men shared with us their stories of how they got to Only a Child, their background, what they've accomplished and want to accomplish. So we've got pictures of the 3 of them there talking with us after we ate. And then after we cleaned up for dinner, we got our craft projects ready for the next day. So that was always like our evening process to get ready for the next day, and getting everything all ready, packed up for us to load into the van for the next morning. All right, so now I'm going to step aside because now we're going to be on Wednesday, Buena Vista. Yes. Do you want me to run this, or do you want to?
Okay.
Do you want me to run this?
Sure, that's fine.
That's probably easier.
Oh, thank you. Very good. So, Wednesday, October 9th. Just to give you a little bit of a flavor of the routine, my experience is a little different than the ladies because I was the guy, and so I had a room all to myself. Actually, a pretty large room with about 4 or 5 bunk beds in it, but I had it all to myself. And at night, we could hear a lot of activity on the streets, and there was a little kind of shop across the street, and they had deliveries early in the morning. So we got up pretty early in the morning. So the routine was that I'd wake up at like 4 in the morning and take my shower, and I would go kind of to my own bathroom area too, and they had a pila there, it's called, which is where many of them, that's everything, that's their water source for their house, you know, but it's like a concrete sink with 3 sections, a big tub in the middle, and then 2 ones on the side, and the clean water's in the middle, you pour it into the side ones, and then you can wash in that and so forth. But I didn't take my shower in there. They had an actual shower, which was kind of an interesting contraption how they got heat. The thing was up on the nozzle, you know, where it would heat it, and so it had like wires rigged to it, and you had to turn it on just to the right exact spot where it would heat. But it was hot water, and so it was very, very good.
An experience all its own.
Right.
In the shower.
And this room that it was in was kind of I guess you could call it a porch area in a way, because it had a fence, and outside the fence was the yard with a wall all around it, and we were right in the middle of Guatemala City, which is just a phenomenally large urban area, and a dangerous urban area sometimes, especially for gringos like us. And but we were surrounded by a big wall, and that being said, though, because of the trees, there was like, what kind of trees were there? Papaya trees?
There's
And
a lime tree.
a lime tree, coffee tree. So in the morning with the birds singing, the trees around, I could kind of pretend I was in the middle of the rainforest.
In the midst of hearing motorcycles boom by.
Except for the motorcycle sounds, right, yes.
Let's tell them, right across the street from the mission house, a judge lived.
Right.
And there was a police car parked there 24 hours a day and about 4 policemen guarding her house.
Right.
Right across the street.
And that's because judges there are, all the whole legal system is based on not good stuff, you know, bribery and the powers that be, you know, whoever has the, how does that saying go? I don't know. Might makes right, basically. And so there's a lot of resentment there, and that's why she had to be under constant guard, because she had her life threatened, because of, naturally people resent that, and you can understand the situation she found herself in, unfortunately. So, but I could kind of pretend in the morning a little bit like I was out in the wilderness, and that wasn't around at all, and if you know me, you know I like that anyway. So it's kind of a nice way to start each day, and I'd get up in the morning, and then after getting ready, I'd review my Bible verse, and we could have coffee and wait for breakfast, which would start at 6, and so that was good. We had our devotions that we talked about too after that, but we had to leave that morning around 7 because we had to get to Buena Vista, which was a little different than some of the other visits that were in more urban areas. This was a very rural area, literally on the side of a hill in the middle of a sugarcane field. Right, so driving out there, it kind of reminded me of Minnesota and the gravel roads that you get out there when you're in southwestern Minnesota by where my grandparents had their farm. And so we got out there and we found ourselves, because of the rain, the river had washed out the road. And so we stopped, and we had to make sure that the van that we drove in would clear all of the rocks that had moved around. And so we stopped, and see, who was it that got out?
Marvin.
Marvin got out, right. Marvin got out, and he moved the rocks, and we were able to continue on. Right. There's Marvin. And you know, Marvin was quite a guy. He's like very peaceful and very sensitive. You would never imagine that before this life, he came from a life of crime, literally. And so he was a good guy. He'd see, like I was getting dehydrated one day, and he's like, "Are you okay?" So just 180-degree transformation. It really is amazing what God can do. And that's one thing there. Anything good that happens, God gets all the credit. And that was amazing to see. Right, he came to the Bible studies. And he especially loved the puppets. He would join in, and he really just, he was like a kid.
Great personality.
Right, wonderful. And they all had personalities. And thinking about this morning, you know, they probably see, I don't know how many hundreds of people. Americans come in. But when you get there, it's like instantly they're your friend. And it was really amazing how they could relate to us.
How far was Buena Vista from Guatemala City?
20 or 22 miles I have in my notes.
Yeah, but it took It took 2 hours. Yeah, right.
Any concern on the trip? I mean, just knowing
Um,
precautions, I think there'd be some concern there, right?
it's not for the faint of heart driving in Guatemala City, I'll tell you that much. There's a lot of motorcycles, a lot of motorcycles. One time we even stopped and left off one of our passengers.
That was on Wednesday because we got back
Yeah,
so late.
on Wednesday. It got so late, the rain, the traffic, it just took forever getting back. So one of the missionaries called her husband. He came by in the motorcycle. We stopped the van. She jumped out, hopped on the motorcycle, and they went home. So, and there are, I mean, this is like 4 or 5 lanes of like cars going everywhere as this is going on. But here we are out in the sugarcane field. Very warm day. It was sunny by this time.
Between 76 and 80.
Right, right. And for us, it felt warm, maybe not as warm for them. So we got out there, and here's where I met the family of the girl that I was able to sponsor. I didn't go down there with the intention of sponsoring anybody, but I was able to sponsor someone by the name of Helen Christina Nayira Toy, a 13-year-old girl in 8th grade. So I like to say she's one of my honorary confirmands that I have, so as we looked around her village where they lived, it was interesting. They'd have tarps on the ground with the corn, and they were drying the corn on top of the tarps right alongside the path, which used to be the town where they live in the middle of this sugarcane field is, and there's corn there too, obviously. Used to be a railroad junction and depot. And in Guatemala, there are no trains anymore. None.
But some of the where the track would go on like at the hill.
Right.
People like to build houses and because it's higher up ground, and then all of the sugar cane is cut with a machete by hand.
Right. So all of them are carrying machetes. Little kids are walking down the street with machetes. Well, which isn't a street, it's a mud path, but, so we did a little tour. We saw a school. It was kind of heartbreaking to see the school in some ways because that's where we saw, that there was a well, but I think the well dried up or something like that. Mm-hmm. And they tried to purify the water, but all the purification equipment, they said we don't need that, so they didn't use that. And they get their water in pails just dripping down from the roofs. And the water doesn't look like anything you or I would want to drink from, but that's what they're used to. That's what they do. They don't think about that even.
And there's no windows. I mean, there's these it's something you decorate with in America, all these metal windows like that.
Right.
There's no glass in them. And the school was painted, remember, bright blue.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids had a tablet, and just little bitty pencils and.
Right, right. And we heard about some of the things in the town there, or village, or whatever you want to call it. Some of the churches come in and they have kind of their own rules. If you mess up too much, you aren't welcome in church. And so when our group came in and did church, all the sinners came, basically. Everyone whose life wasn't perfect, and it's kind of interesting to see that, and how the people were treated by the missionaries that we worked with, and how the people acted towards us. It's interesting to see how they lived. Many of them have animals that they raise, and some of them make charcoal in pits in the ground. And so I finally got to see the family of Helen, and an amazing family. It's very, very moving. I couldn't keep a dry eye. Helen is 13, as I said. She has a sister, Kimberly, a brother, Rodolfo, who's 12, Jason, her brother is 1, and Amanda, who's 3. The mother's name is Erica. I think the father's name is Rodolfo. He's a big, strapping guy. Yep, right here, you can see the family there. That's Helen right there. Beautiful, lovely people. You can see the house in which they live there. And there I am with Helen. They live by a river there. We got a glimpse of people washing their clothes in the river too. But there's our group too, out in kind of, we went for a little walk. And so that was good. And really for me, I guess when I lost it and broke down in tears was when Helen read Psalm 5. Give ear to my words, O Lord. Consider my singing. Listen to my cry for help, my King and my God. For to you I pray. In the morning, O Lord, you hear my voice. In the morning I lay my request before you and wait in expectation. I just thought about like her in her life, waiting for that day, me not even knowing that it would come until just literally the evening before, when I decided that, yes, I would sponsor her. And she was trusting in God for a lot longer than that someone would come and help to sponsor her so she could get an education. And what her education is like is she has to travel very far away to go to school if she wants to progress in life, basically, which is very, very dangerous for a young girl, needless to say, very, very dangerous. And so it's a huge task to find safe transportation. So she would take a bus and go in. One day a week she would have school, but she would have, 12 subjects, all in that one day.
6 o'clock in the morning.
What's
She
that?
has to leave at 6 o'clock
Yeah,
in the morning.
she would have to leave at 6 o'clock and be all day at school and then come back home. On top of all of her chores that she would do, and so her and her sister especially would do all of the chores. And it was interesting listening to her talk about that. And just she was the shyer sister of the bunch, and she was nervous about, she was worried about making tortillas, if she would do it right. And I just thought about, we just go to the store and buy a tortilla. And here, one of the things she was worried about is, how do I make tortillas in a way that's acceptable for my family? And so that is, part of just everyday life for her. And, they don't have a lot of the stuff that we have. And really, quite honestly, their life isn't about stuff. There's more important things. And right, exactly. So I could say a lot more about that. It just really was life-changing and a blessing to me, a very humbling and moving experience. Thankful for all of the missionaries and the help that they gave us. We did our skit underneath where they had the church, this kind of tin roof structure that you see there. Interesting experience. So I think it was, I'm trying to remember who it was that I was talking to, but all of a sudden these flies descended upon us and started biting us viciously. And he was really worried about it. I'm like, no, it's okay. So I knew about the flies. A little later on in the day, I was talking to some of the boys, and the flies started to come. And it was interesting. As soon as the flies came, about 24 boys that were gathered around me took off in every direction so they wouldn't get bitten by the flies. So it was every man for himself at that point. But we got through that, and the flies didn't bother me too much after that. But it was just kind of an interesting experience. And again, I thought about it, what it would be like to have that every day. All of a sudden flies would attack you like that. But so.
We need to tell them about, we made food for these people.
Right.
We had little poke buns at the mission house,
Uh-huh.
and we had gallons of cheese whiz. Yeah. And we made these sandwiches.
Yep.
And we wrapped them in a napkin, and we held them in a tote. And I was out in the audience, and as they would leave, they would get a sandwich,
Yep.
and then a little juice box, and they were thrilled to death. And then someone said, could I have two? I said, we don't know if we have enough, just one now. You come back.
Yeah, yeah, they were. And Helen's family was and Helen herself were very interested in like simple things like what do you eat? And I tried to explain my protein shake that I have every morning. And but it was great. I cherished that time. I got to work with Helen and another girl as they were having their lesson. I was helping them with a word search that they were doing. So I started helping Helen, and the other girl sitting next to me was like, "Help me too!" And so I had to give her a hand as well, which she enjoyed, and it was great to have that experience, just to be able to be with people like that and connect to them. And like we were talking about, that's maybe not something they're used to, especially maybe seeing a guy in that kind of a role. And so I guess I did stand out a little bit as a guy when I was there with my bald head and all, but
Height. Your height.
and my height, right? But it was just a wonderful experience. So I'll stop talking and let you guys continue.
But they wanted to hear God's word.
Yes, they did. Yes, that was expected, that they would have a Bible verse and we would have a Bible verse, and everyone there would share about their Bible verse that they
Share with
picked.
someone else.
Right.
Or do you want me to?
Okay, so on Thursday we went to Gonzales Park. We pretty much had our same normal morning routine. We'd get up around like 6:30, 7, and then we'd eat, and then had our devotion, and then we left. And it was maybe an hour away, about that. And we got to go on home visits. I got to see Cat 13, who I sponsor. She's like a sister to me. Her mom is like a mom to me. That's her right there. And that's like your other daughter. And as you can tell down there, that's Carlos. He's translating for Catherine and I. And we just like catch each other up on what's been happening in our lives. And they've been having a difficult time because her uncle passed away, and she was really close to them. He lived with her, and her whole family was heartbroken when he passed away. But she was very happy when I came to see her because it brought her joy in her life. And she told me to pray for her and her family through this difficult time. And I don't know who you guys visited.
Do you remember who you all visited when you were in Gonzales Park? The bus.
Oh yes, that was the woman that, I'm trying to remember her name now. She had this woman that we visited had been getting on the bus one day or off the bus and slipped. The bus, it's not like here. When they drop you off, you're left to your own devices. You get off the bus, you get away from the bus on your own. But she's elderly and she slipped and the bus ran her over. And then a motorcycle hit her, maybe the other way around. And so she was very severely injured and lost an arm and was in the hospital for 6 months.
And they didn't think she was gonna live, and she also she couldn't walk with her left leg.
Right,
It was all
right.
damaged and mangled up.
So the whole family, especially one sister, takes care of her, and they were praying that she would be able to walk again, but they were so thankful that she could eat even, because when it was time for her to leave the hospital, they said, well, you need to leave the hospital. That's it. Figure out how to eat. and thankfully she was able to figure out, and her family were able to figure out how she could be cared for and how she could basically survive. The hospitals there, the public ones, are interesting too. They don't have food. Your family has to bring you food when you're at the hospital.
And they have a daughter, these people, the lady laying in that lounge chair has a daughter in New Jersey, and she sends them money monthly, and so they're able to afford help for the mother, and that does help them out, and she comes and visits once a year.
So then we had our faith lesson, and Marvin took my spot in the faith lesson because I was spending time with Catherine. So he got to be a puppet, and he really enjoyed it. I saw a video of him doing it, and he was like messing around with it. And then, yeah, it was very rainy that day. We had those big tents, and it was very wet. The kids, they were making like rain angels, kind of how we would do in the snow, and they were like sliding and playing soccer, and they would get the girls all wet. and
Boys are boys, right?
Yeah. And then after we were done in Gonzales Park, we got to go to a McDonald's in Guatemala, and
Which was very rare.
it was, yes, it usually doesn't happen when Americans come, but the Guatemalan missionaries were begging Kevin to let us go. So we got to go to McDonald's, and we got vanilla cones, and Brooke ordered for us in Spanish, and
It was funny.
it,
Ice cream, all scream for
Yes,
ice
Shelby
Yeah.
started a chant.
yeah. And Manuel, who's the driver, he was driving us, one of the Guatemalan missionaries asked him what his favorite English word was, and he said ice cream. And he doesn't speak English very well, but he likes ice cream, so he learned how to say that. And I think that's it.
Okay, thank you, Alyssa. Okay, now I'm back playing the little girl.
I remember when Oscar, he was sitting in the back of one of the vans, and the van had to slow down really fast, and Oscar slid all the way from the back to the front of the van. He thought that was hilarious.
They were part of the family, or we were.
Okay, now I'm playing the part of Brooke again. Okay, so on Friday, October 11th, we were back in Guatemala City for the day, and it was actually our final full day in Guatemala. So it starts off as kind of a happy, sad day, all in one, because it's our last day, and so we have to say goodbye to all the Guatemalan missionaries that day. Sandra was our devotion leader that day. She talked about how we need mercy and compassion, and that we always need to listen to Him and follow Him.
She really helped me sound good because she translated for most of the things I said. I don't know what I would have done without her.
Yes,
She was amazing.
Sandra's awesome. And then after devotion, we got to take our final group pictures up on the roof. And then after that, we split off into 3 different groups, I guess you could say, to have one group went to the Mayan ruins, which is near the mission house, and so they just walked there. And then, so that group was Pastor Darren and Brooke, got to go see that. And so they got to see the different worship styles that the Mayans had, and then also to see the difference in Guatemala City as a whole compared to the Mayans park within a city. So it's a lot of green space, and it's just very different from the rest of the city. And Shelby got to go to the coffee roasting plant to pick up all of our Guatemalan coffee orders, but then also learn about how they do coffee in Guatemala. And then Alyssa and I stayed back at the mission house to help Oscar. We got to organize a couple of big tubs of toys that were just all messed up because they used them before the faith lessons, and the kids just throw them all back in the bin when they're done. So we got to do a lot of like little puzzles and stuff to make sure everything was together. So, and then once we all regrouped back at the house, I think I missed some pages here. So here's the Mayan ruins. And then here's another photo of that with Brooke and Pastor Darren. It's actually kind of cool because they're continually excavating in the Mayan ruins and uncovering more and more. So you could almost go every year and it'd be a different experience because there's more uncovered. And here's some more final photos. Here's Manuel, his big hat, when he was cleaning out the van. Let's see. Once we all regrouped back at the house, we got to have lunch with all of the Guatemalan missionaries before our faith lesson. So on Friday, all of the children and parents that live in Guatemala City actually come to the mission house for the faith lessons. And so we had a Guatemalan/American meal that day with hot dogs and additional all of the other leftovers from the week. So it's kind of our final day to eat whatever your favorite meal was. The faith lesson on Friday was right at the house. We had only 4 children in the lesson. And so these 3 boys and then 1 girl. And we got to sing songs, pray, and perform our puppet skit for the final time with them. They really liked the craft that we had prepared. And it's kind of cool to have that really small group after you have hundreds of kids. It's so much more relaxing, and you really get to have one-on-one time with each of them. So that's really cool. We cleaned up around the house, and then we had to say goodbye to the Guatemalan missionaries at the end of the day, which is one of the hardest things because you grow so close to them after spending just 5 days with them. But you have so much time together in the van to talk and get to know them better, so they really become like family. And then once all the Guatemalans had left for the day, we got to have a special dinner at a special location, which Kevin really plays up with his like, ooh, it's, big surprise. So we got to have Guatemalan Pizza Hut up on the roof. The clouds were starting to move in though, and so it was actually starting to get cold, so we went inside to eat the pizza before it started to rain again. So after that, then we gather together, just us Americans, and reflect upon the week, where we have a set of questions that Kevin asks us just to, kind of prepare us to come back. And happy tears, sharing all the memories that we had and what some of our takeaways were, and also sad, knowing that our time had come to an end. We went through and answered the questions about our time in Guatemala and reflected on everything we did and our experiences that we each encountered and the tasks we completed with the help of God. And even though we all had the same week and did most of the same things, we each had different answers and takeaways for our time in Guatemala. We could all relate to what one another said, but we all had a different outlook on our mission trip in Guatemala. After this emotional time, we talked about how we can share our experiences with each and every one of you as we journey back into the States. To just hear us talk about what we did during our week is nothing compared to the memories and moments we all cherished together. And as we finished, we headed back downstairs, did some final packing up of all of our things, and started to prepare for our journey back back home to the United States. So Brooke says, it's very hard to put into words the impact we have all experienced in our week in Guatemala. I think I can speak for all of us when I say we are also very grateful for the journey we have got to go on in Guatemala, helping those who need it, praying with those who believe, seeing how much of an impact we not only make on their lives, but what impact they make on ours, and most importantly, the work that God has done. We are also grateful of the gifts and the talents that we were able to share with the young and the old in our week in Guatemala, and we thank God for those things. We also thank all of you for your prayers and that you've prayed for us, and for the in-kind donations that were given for us to take with us to Guatemala, as well as the financial help. Shelby.
I was just going to say that people don't have material things, but they are hungry for the Word of God. And it was an experience that I will never forget. And it's just heartwarming to see how appreciative they were of our visit and what we brought with us, and how we went out into the field to share God's Word.
Does anybody have any questions?
What was something you took away from it all?
Oh gosh, I think you just the fact that they're filled with hope for eternal life. It's
Cool.
not about the here and the now. It's about eternity in heaven with Jesus forever.
Nice.
And it's so inspiring to be around that for a whole week.
Right.
And they're eager to hear the word, you know, they're just,
Mm-hmm.
they want to hear the word.
What about you, Alyssa? Anything stick out to you?
I just feel like it brought me closer.
Cool.
So what would be a change when you come back for something like that? It just, you know, hearing it is one thing, and seeing it, I can feel the emotion myself.
Right.
But doing that, how do, you know, so maybe call it a transformation. Is your view, you do things differently? Is there a change in yourselves after coming back from that? Do you find yourself doing things differently?
It's hard to shake the frustration of the materialism in the United States.
Right.
And just seeing that all around us and being like, you know, knowing what we saw there and how none of that stuff matters to them, you know, and then, you know, we're so exposed to that here,
Right.
so different.
It's a very humbling experience then.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
And yet, you know, the country, you know, there's, you know, they have dirt floors in their houses and things, but the people, they dress, you know what I mean, they're proud. You know, you see them walking around with white, maybe white slacks or, you know, I mean, they're proud. They're really proud and like I said, it's so, and they're hungry for the word of God. When we went to church, we actually went early because, church filled up, and we actually stood outside the church to wait to get in. And as we were, there was someone taking a herd of about, I had to share this with you, herd of about maybe 10 goats down the street on the sidewalk, and one of the goats got off the sidewalk, and he whistled a little bit, and that goat got back up on the sidewalk. I want to share that with you. But, and then there was communion at church, which we partook in, whether it's speak English, and they had little Ritz crackers on a platter, and then they would just pass the platter down. And then, you know, those little root beer glasses, they're little shot glasses like that with a handle, that's what they had their grape juice in. So it was, and they had music and dancers, and it was very nice.
So each week there's a new group of people that come in, or is this
Mm-hmm.
52 weeks out of the year that they
No.
do this, or is there a gap?
There's a gap. So it kind of goes like they'll have 3 weeks in a row where they'll have different groups coming, and then they'll have a week without American missionaries coming down. And then like over the holidays they don't have anybody. So I think the last group is like the middle of November when they leave, and then they don't start up again until after the new year.
And the closest church, I think Wausau had,
Mm-hmm.
Wausau and Kenosha, was it, or something?
Yep, there's a group from Wausau. And here's an interesting thing, when we were at the National Youth Gathering, I was on the elevator with my Bible in my Guatemala Bible cover. And there was a lady on the elevator with me, and she asked me if I had been to Guatemala, and I said, yeah, you know, and she's like, oh, who do you go with? Well, she was actually from the church in Wausau that goes to Guatemala. So that was, yeah, what a small world. So that was cool. But when our next trip that's scheduled for Christ Lutheran for our group is in August of 2021, and we'll actually have the opportunity to go with the group from Faith Lutheran in Topeka, Kansas.
Oh.
And Alyssa and I got to go with them last summer when it was just the two of us. So awesome group. We'll have a lot of FaceTime preparation with them and getting ready to go down there as a combined group. So I'm really looking forward to that. Any other questions?
I got a statement with Melissa there with adopting a sister. I thought that was really touching.
Right.
And how you guys then. So did you adopt it for a number of years already, or just?
This is the 3rd year.
I thought it was cool. I said, wow. person, you know, that's cool.
And you have an extended family.
Right, yes, exactly. And it's just so cool to experience that joy through that family, because they know that we're here in the United States praying for them, and that, you know, they're praying for us, so.
When you adopt a child, you can send them cards and pictures. They love pictures, and all the mail goes to the mission house. And then when they come to the mission house, they get their mail. And so we have the opportunity to see them open their mail, and they love pictures. You cannot send them money, but just communicate with them.
Anything else? All right, well, thank you for your attention and for joining us.